Hi everyone! Today let's talk about how to design games. In particular, I want to talk about an aspect of it I call the content creation fallacy. There might be a different term for this, but so far I've only seen people talk about this topic in the abstract. What I want to do is to make it specific by giving examples from my own game development experience. What is the content creation fallacy? It's the idea of just adding one more thing to the game. Even though this doesn't sound like a lot of work, it actually is once you start thinking about it. Let's get specific with my horror game A Home in Darkness, which you can buy on itch.io. Link is in the description of this video. In this game you need to defeat supernatural enemies by using rituals instead of guns. An interesting idea, right? But what if I want to introduce a new enemy to the game? How does the content creation fallacy come into play here? What do I need to do to fully implement a new enemy to the game so that it is seamlessly integrated and not a work in progress? Let's first name the obvious. A 3D enemy model, at least one attack and walk animation, sounds, gameplay code for specialized behavior, a complete Godot scene with all components necessary for the enemy to work properly. In Unity, this would be a game object. In general, it's some sort of easy-to-use representation of the enemy in your game engine of choice. So far, there is already a lot to do. But for my game, there is a bit more. Creating a book giving a description about the enemy. In other games, this might be the lore of the enemy for some sort of bestiary. Next is creating a ritual and everything that comes with that to fight the enemy. Maybe also some subtle hints on which book to read or how the ritual itself is used. You can think of this part as the necessary glue. It gives the player all the information they need to interact with the new content and leads them on their way to experience said new content. In other games, the most straightforward example might be a quest introducing the new enemy type. And lastly, a scenario where the enemy will occur with maybe some dialogues and cutscenes. This is especially relevant for story-based linear games, but even for roguelikes you might have to consider this. Maybe the enemy type only occurs in a particular environment, like a snow area, or it's a boss enemy with its own room to spawn in. Now this is starting to sound like a very daunting task, doesn't it? And that's what I mean by content creation fallacy. You think you are only adding one thing to the game, but in truth, you need to add many other things as well, just to make it feel right. Before you write a comment, of course, it is possible to get away with not doing the work, in some cases to save time, like reusing sounds for example. But when developing my own game, I had to realize a simple but sad truth of project management. Not having to do the work is an exception rather than the rule. Even if you put in so much time beforehand to have a very flexible system for enemies. Even if you write your own tools to reduce the time needed to create enemies. Even if you rely on buying pre-made sound assets and models, you'll still end up with the same realization I have. Creating content is time consuming. There is no way to avoid it, but there are ways to reduce it. Not just with the methods I mentioned before, but also by planning the game around the content creation fallacy. Instead of being like, okay, I want to make this big RPG with hundreds of enemies and items and a 60-hour story, you should stop and think about every step required to introduce a single new enemy or a single new item. Once you've listed all steps required, like I have in this video, making 100 enemies doesn't sound feasible anymore. So now you can start thinking about how to reduce the workload. Maybe all your enemies are just cubes? Then you wouldn't need to create a 3D model anymore. Or instead of making a 3D game, you make a 2D, because you are more proficient making sprites. Maybe instead of having a bestiary and quest book, you leave those things more vague, like Dark Souls did. Of course, you could also just create an arcadey, not so serious game where all the different elements don't need to fit that well together or can be removed entirely. The content creation fallacy can be applied to every type of content in the game. Do you really need an open world? If so, what does it mean to create a new town? Do you need new building models or NPCs? What about dialogues, etc.? I'll leave you with this little thing to think about today. Maybe you'll get new insights into how to develop your own game. Thank you very much for watching, and consider taking a look at my game A Home in Darkness. Until next time, bye bye!